Hi, I'm Jay Richards. We are here at the COSM Technology Summit 2023 in Bellevue, Washington, sponsored by the Discovery Institute. And we just finished a really interesting panel on the limits and possibilities of artificial intelligence. And it was, in some ways, the sort of contrary take on the potential of AI. We had heard from the inimitable and famous Ray Kurzweil this morning. And this panel was moderated by Walter Meyers, who is a senior fellow at Discovery Institute and also a principal engineering manager at Microsoft. And the panel consisted with Meyers as moderator, Bill Dembski of Discovery Institute, George Montañez of Harvey-Mudd University, and Bob Marks, affiliated with Discovery and also at Baylor University. And I am joined by the moderator, Walter Meyers. Walter, good to see you.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for having me here today.
I have to say that was probably, I will say for me, it was maybe the funnest panel. And so give us a kind of once-over lightly if you're going to summarize the general discussion.
I think to summarize the panel, what we wanted to do was sort of bring this sort of back into focus and bring it into reality.
Yeah.
I mean, the singularitarians such as Kurzweil have been out for a while with all sorts of prognostications about AI, the AI singularity, AI eventually taking over everything. And I mean, and I think it's a somewhat optimistic view of things, but we just don't think it really matches with the reality in terms of what we know these large language models, can do. And they do some pretty amazing things, and we don't want to take away from that. But we do believe that there are some limits to that, and we think that that's based on what we understand from the perspective of being humans and human creativity. We just don't think that the AI will one day supplant human creativity.
So we're talking about these large language models, but most people that are familiar with them, is these chatbots, right? That's now what we're in Chat 4, right? So it's not GPT-4, right? It's not Chat GPT, so this is moving quickly. But of course, there are these others, Google Bard and Bing AI Chat and others. So they're impressive. I mean, I will say as someone who uses these, they're impressive when you first experience them. But why are those still limited, and why does this not portend the sort of end of human creativity and interaction?
Well, for one thing, we don't know actually exactly how they work.
Yeah.
We just know that they do work. So essentially what they've done is, I believe in GPT-4, there's 175 billion vectors, if you will.
Okay.
So what these vectors are in the model is basically those vectors are looking at relationships. And what it does is it asks a question. What it's answering is going through each word and constructing that word and thinking, what is that most likely answer?
And so it's doing a little statistical calculation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Based on this huge vector space.
Yeah.
You know, humans, we have about 100 billion neurons. They have 175 billion neurons.
Okay.
But we have literally trillions or 10 trillion or more of actual synapses and connections between those neurons. So, so what we're able to do is completely different from what ChatGPT is actually doing.
Yeah, in fact, I can't remember ever running multiple statistical analyses and coming to a conclusion ever. So if that's happening, I mean, we're all completely unaware of it, right? That whatever's happening, it's mimicking the sort of output is something that's like, okay, that in a sense is intelligent, but it's, of course, it's running over massive amount of space, all of which has been produced by human beings and human choices in the interactions.
Right. And one thing that George had talked about in the panel discussion was the idea of model collapse. One thing that you continually need is input from these humans putting into these models. These models can't, for example, talk to one another, or the model can't say feed on itself.
Okay, so what is model collapse specifically? What does that refer to?
Model collapse would be in a case where a model is continually feeding on its own data, and there's no data that's coming eventually from the outside, or it's a model that's feeding on another model.
Okay.
So you eventually, it's statistically, it comes to a point where it just sort of hits this area where there's very little variance in terms of what it's coming out with.
What it can do.
Right. In other words, it doesn't have what Bob Marks speaks about in his book, Non-Computable You. It's sort of that spark or genius. So, for example, Bob uses this in a book. When Paul McCartney wrote Yesterday, he went around asking people, have you heard this before? Is there anything like this? Because he just could not believe it.
The tune was in his head.
The tune was in there. He couldn't believe that no one had done that before.
Yeah.
And it was right. No one had done that before. And so he wanted to validate that before putting this on wax. And so the thing is, there's always that element of human creativity. Anything that those computers are doing, and Bob speaks about this in this book, it's because of that human creativity that actually programmed it. So I don't think an AI will ever do anything that was not something that had to do at some point with human creativity being involved and giving it that new capability that it had.
Well, and so is there worry? I'm wondering, because at the moment, I mean, when let's say we go to the GPT-4 and asking a question, it's surveying the landscape of the internet and the World Wide Web. It's not surveying the answers of prompts of itself or of other chats at the moment in its sort of data set. So, but is the risk that sort of initially that we had sort of clean information that's coming from humans, but eventually you get a bunch of noise from sort of other productions of other models? Is that the fear with model collapse, or just that they constantly have to be refined and retuned by actual human engineers?
The fear is the thing is they will constantly have to be retuned by additional information that's coming in, because in other words, it's always learning. As you talk to it, it's continually learning, and you're correcting it. If it comes with a wrong response, you say, hey, it's this. And also, there are some issues with computational type things. When you ask things, for example, like what is the largest city in Guatemala, or what are the largest Latin countries by area, sometimes it doesn't really quite understand the context, and it might get the actual computations themselves wrong. And Wolfram talks about this in his book.
Okay.
So so it's very good at language, doing language type things and asking those types of questions. But more computational things, it has more difficulty.
That's interesting, and that's because there's just a heck of a lot of language out for it to survey. So because I know Bob Marks used the sort of famous example of this kind of context dependent phrases that humans use all the time with ambiguous pronouns.
Right, exactly.
Which was a problem for these for a while, but I assume, look, if it's got 1 billion cases of humans doing it correctly in print, it can sort of solve that problem too. And so the question is going to be sort of, I guess there's 2 questions. One, what's actually happening here? My own sense is that whatever's happening is qualitatively different from what's happening in our heads.
It's qualitatively different.
One. Yeah. But then there's the question of, okay, exactly how much is it going to be capable of doing, even if we set aside this kind of, this more far-flung claims about being displaced kind of metaphysically? Just like, what is it going to be able to imitate?
Well, in the GPT-4 model, as Bob had outlined, they did make some corrections in terms of some of the types of inferences it can make. In other words, those types of pronouns, things that were that are ambiguous. So yeah, it will continue to get better. And I mean, GPT-5, 6, 7, 10, 11, or 12, those will continue to get better. But the thing is, they will always depend on the data that's being fed into them, the data that's being fed into the model. So there's continual data that's fed into that model. And yeah, they will get better and better and better. I don't see a case. Now, I think in terms of, it's not going to be a case where, say, they replace humans. And I think someone spoke about this earlier.
Yeah.
There will be new jobs, right? Just as 100 years ago we had horse and buggy, then we had cars. Well, now then you needed mechanics to fix the cars. So I think we'll always advance in that thing. It's just a matter that things will continue to change. I think that's what, and to me, they're tools. I think people should see them as tools. Tools that humans can use to make us more productive.
Absolutely.
So I hardly worry about the AI singularity, if you will, of Kurzweil. And we'll see what happens in 2029,
no,
right?
That's right. He said this morning, 2029, he said, is going to be the year in which basically longevity research finally is able to negate the amount of time that it takes to get older. So I get a year older, but it will be so advanced that it will, basically solve a year of the longevity problem, which means that I'm going to be frozen in place in late middle age for eternity, if Kurzweil is right. So we'll see. The nice thing about 2029 is, most of us probably, hopefully be
God
around. Willing,
we'll see.
To be around to see who's right.
Yeah.
It's great to see you, Walter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jay. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for joining us. We're here at the COSM Technology Summit in Bellevue, Washington.